Okay, so we're continuing in Ilchot Tefillin, and now we're getting, so we spoke about the batim, right? We had the batim, how you make them, the shin. Now we're getting into the closing of the tefillin with the titura and the ma'abarta. So just very briefly, what do we have in the Mekorot on this? So the Gemara says in Masechet Menachot Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, Amar Rav Chanan Amar Rav, titura de tefillin halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Amar Abaye ma'abarta de tefillin halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Now the standard explanation of what are the titura and the ma'abarta is what Rashi here says. Gesher, titura is a gesher, it's a bridge. Lachar shenatan ha'igorot b'batim, in other words, after you put the clef, the parshiyot, into the bayit, derech hapeh harachav, שהבתים עשויים כעין בתי ידיים שקוראים גוטן. What is guten? I don't know. It's like I guess it's something in French. But anyway, it's like there is an opening on the bottom of the bayit where you put in the tefillin, the parshiyot. ומכניס האגרות דרך פה ונותן בבתי האצבעות, וחוטף מג' הדפנות מכל אחת מעט, והדלת נשארת ארוכה וכופלה לאותו אורך, מטילה על חודן של הג' דפנות ותופר חודן של ג' דפנות על רוחבו של זה, והוא בית מושבו של תפילין ונראה כאין דף של גשר. So in other words, according to Rashi, you take from the leather itself from which you made the bayit, you have a lot left over, so you cut it on all the sides, but on one side, the fourth side, you leave a long piece which you can use to close the tefillin off on the bottom. And the closing of the tefillin off on the bottom, that's the titura, and it's like a bridge because it extends a bit beyond the bayit. And what is the ma'abarta? Ma'abarta, כשנותן הרצועה של תפילין סביב אותו טיטורה, יכפיל הקלף סביב הרצועה, כאין שעושים לפי המכנסיים, שלא תהיה הרצועה קבועה, אלא שהוא רוצה למושכה אילך ואילך ומעריך ראש זה, ומקצר ראש זה, ולשון מעברתא שמעבירה ומושכה לכל צד שירצה. So the מעברתא is the place beyond the titura where you put in the straps of the tefillin, the רצועות, and you want to leave it open, like you do for, let's say, your belt in your pants, so that you can pull the רצועה backwards and forwards. So in other words, the titura and the מעברתא, they're on the bottom parts of the tefillin. Again, the titura is also, like we learned in the past, it also has to be square, like the bayit, and the ma'abarta goes beyond that, and that's where you put in the רצועה. Now here Tosfot points out that Tosfot says, ומשמע מתוך פירוש הקונטרסט, שהבתים והטיטורה הכל מאור אחד ואין נוהגים כן. In other words, the way Rashi described it, the titura is essentially made out from the same leather that you made the bayit, and you just extend it beyond to wrap it below. Tosfot here points out Ein Nogin Ken, and the minhag was, at least in those times, the Rosh also brings it. He says, "Va'olam lo nagu ken lefi she'or habatim dak, ולוקחים אור עב וחזק וכופלים אותו לשניים, ועושים נקב מרובע בכפל עליון, מכניסים בו הבתים, והכפל התחתון מכסה את פי הבתים." In other words, the problem that they had was in those times, nowadays we make the entire tefillin from or behema gasa. But in those times, they used to make the batim from or behema daka. Why? Because they didn't have the tools that we have nowadays. So they had a difficult time to mold or behema gasa into the tefillin. So they would make the batim from or behema daka, but they wanted the titura to be stronger. So for the titura, they would take or behema gasa to make it stronger. Okay, that's why here the Rosh says that you take a or av to make the titura, and that's why they would do not like Rashi, that you would make it from the same ore itself that you would make the bayit, but rather you would attach a separate ore to the bayit, and according to Tosfot and the Rosh, that's fine. It doesn't have to be all from the same ore, although from Rashi it appears that it should be from the same ore. Now just two more points on this before we get to the Shulchan Aruch. Here Tosfot and the Rosh bring another explanation of the Aruch that reverses, and he says that what we call the titura is the ma'abarta, and what we call the ma'abarta is actually the titura. Okay, fine. And there's also a third explanation, which we will see discussed later on the siman, that the ma'abarta is a strap that you put on top of the tefillin sheliyad, okay, which was also customary, at least in the past, and we'll see a discussion on that as well. Now, just before we get to the Shulchan Aruch, what's interesting is if we go to the Rambam, and the Rambam mentions all the things, he says, Shmoneh halachot yesh b'maaseh tefillin, kulan halacha Moshe mitzinai, lefichach kulan makbot. So he mentions 8 things. There are a total of 10 things which he says are halacha Moshe mitzinai by tefillin. 2 of them have to do with the parashiyot themselves, the klaf, and another 8 have to do with the tefillin itself. So when he lists the 8 things here, he brings them about, and that's what he says here. ושעושים להן מעבורת מאור החיפוי שתיכנס ברצועה עד שתהיה עוברת והולכת בתוך טובר שלה. So he mentions the Ma'abata, but he doesn't seem to mention anywhere the Titura. So how did the Rambam understand the Titura? So I saw Mefalshim explain, and I also saw my Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Nachum Rabinovich, in Yad Pshuta, he also tries to bring proofs for this, is that one of the points that we'll see that's different between the Rambam and the Rosh, for example, is the Rambam says that, he says here, one of the 8 things, he says, Shikroch ha-parashiyot b'matlit, that you need to wrap the parashiyot themselves when they're inside before you put them inside the batim, you need to wrap them with some sort of cloth. So it could be that that's how the Rambam explained Titura. Okay. Says here, בספר המלאכה כתב שהמקור מנחות ל"ה, טיטורה דתפילין הלכה למשה מסיני, זה לשונו ספר המלאכה, לכאורה לא באר רבינו משה עניין טיטורה מהו, what is the טיטורה, ונראה לי שהרב פירש טיטורה מתלית, כדאמרין על פרק במה בהמה, מהי לבובין תותרי, ופירש הרב ז"ל וכן רבינו משה שהן מתליות, שמייפין, מקשטים בה את הבמה, ואך אינם מפרשים טיטורה מתלית שכורכים בו את התפילין. So that according to the Rambam, the Titura could be just this maklit that the Rambam holds of, that you need to wrap the parashiyot. Regarding the question of whether it needs to be from the same piece of leather of the batim or it could be a different piece, the Rambam writes regarding when you make the tefillin, he says, "Umachzirin miktzat haor milemata vetofrin oto mi'arba pinotav u'minachin min haor melamata." So according to the Rambam, it seems also that from the same piece of leather, like Rashi said, you make also the closing off on the bottom part, which again, according to other Rishonim, is called the Titura and the Ma'abata. According to the Rambam, maybe it's just called the Ma'abata. But it seems to be also the same piece of leather. Again, it's not clear in the Rambam that it's likuva, if I want to make it from a different piece of leather. Rashi doesn't say either, but they both describe it as being from the same piece of leather. Okay, let's go to the Shulchan Aruch then. So says the Mechaber, Titura detfilin halacha Moshe misinai, והיינו שישים אור למטה לכסות פי הבתים, ונקרא כאין דף של גשר הנקרא טיטורה. So the Mechaber just says, put leather on the bottom to close off the opening of the bayit, and it looks a bit like a bridge, and that's the Titura. Okay, here, the Mishnah Berurah says, ואפילו לדעת הסוברים והבתים צריכים להיות כולם מאור אחד ממש, מכל מקום לא בעינן שתהיה הטיטורה והמברתא עם הבתים מאור אחד, אלא אפילו עם אור בפני עצמו כשר. וזהו שכתב המחבר שישים. So he says, מעיקר הדין בהלכה, like Rashi, like Tosfot rather, in the Rosh, that it could be from a separate piece of leather. He says, ומכל מקום, אם באפשרי טוב להדר גם בזה לצאת דעת המחברים, it's better to be machmir, like he says here in the Berurah Halacha, which is Rashi and Rambam, that they hold that it should be from the same piece of leather that the batim are made of. You just extend that piece of leather to close off on the bottom. And he says even what the Rosh said, that nowadays it's better, he says, because they wanted to make it from a stronger leather. Nowadays, again, that they know how to work even with the Or Behemagasa, so then that reasoning of the Rosh is not so applicable. So again, as far as I know, nowadays when tefillin are made, they do make, at least as far as what I've read, they do make the batim, rather the titur and the ma'abata, from the same piece of leather that the batim are made, and there's a piece that sort of extends that. From that, you shape the titura and the ma'abarta. Okay. Continuing here in the Mechaber. מעברת דתפילין הלכה למשה מסיני, והיינו שאור הטיטורה יהיה ארוך מצד אחד, ויעשה בו המעברתא. In other words, from the titura extends beyond the titura more leather from which you make the מעברתא. כיצד? יחתכנו בשני הצדדים שלא תהא רחבה כמו רוחב הטיטורה, כדי שיהיה ניכר ריבוע הטיטורה. In other words, so to separate between the titura and the מעברתא, so you see that where does the titura end and where the מעברתא begins, you make a cut into the leather from both sides, like we do, and that sort of indicates, okay, here ends the titura. From now on, it's the ma'abarta. But you don't cut it off completely because again, you want to make the ma'abarta also from the same piece of leather. ובאותה מעברתא עוברת הרצועה, ועל שם כך נקראת מעברתא גם בתפילין של יד יעשה טיטורה מעברתא. Okay, and you do the same thing by תפילין של יד as well. Okay, יגלגל כל פרשה מסופה לתחילתה. When you roll the parashiyot, you roll it from the end to the beginning. Okay, just like we do by a mezuzah. We learned that you rolled it from the end of the writing to the beginning, so that if you would come to open it, you would open it right at the beginning of the writings. That I think appears also in the Rambam. This idea of יגלגל כל פרשה מסופה לתחילתה. Here he says, כמו מזוזה שנגללת מאחד כלפי שמה ולא להפך. That we begin to rolling in the echad at the end of the line towards the beginning of the line. And again, the idea is that if you would open and read it, it would be in the beginning. And then he says, וקורחם בקלף קטן. Okay, so this is interesting. This is what I mentioned, that the Rambam says that you need to wrap the tefillin with a matlit. The Rambam says actually matlit. It doesn't even have to be klaf. It could be just from a piece of cloth. However, the Mechaber says to do it with the klaf. This was actually interesting because the Rambam said it's alachan Moshe Sinai that you need to wrap it. The Rosh says that their minhag was not to wrap the parshiyot with any matlit. There's a source for this idea of the matlit in the Yerushalmi, but the Rosh says that's talking about a case that in case the klaf ripped, that you glue something to stick it together. But the Mechaber rules like the Rambam, that you do need to wrap it with, it could be with a cloth. He says with a klaf katan, with a piece of parchment. And some say it has to be specifically a kosher klaf, not just any klaf. Here the Mishnah Berurah says, now, if, for example, you did not wrap it with klaf, so he says here, that's because of the opinion of the Rosh that they don't have this halakha Moshe Sinai wrapping the parshiyot with a klaf or with a matlit. He has a discussion in the Be'aracha whether you can make a bracha on such a tefillin or not. He says that really you can make a bracha because he holds the Karadim is not like the Rambam, even though he says some are choshesh for the Rambam and say not to make a bracha if you have such tefillin. And then he says here, then you need to, and this everybody agrees to, this is explicit in the Gemara, that you need to wrap around the parshiyot a piece of hair from a kosher animal. Agas says the Rama, ונוהגים לכרוך שיער על הפרשה, ואחר כך כורכים עליו קלף כשר, וחוזרים וכורכים עליו שיער. In other words, that you do first, the Rama says you do first, you wrap it around it hair, then you put the klaf on, and then you put hair again on top. Why is that? The reason for that is that there are two opinions as to whether the hair goes above the klaf or below the klaf. The Rambam writes that you need to put it above the klaf. He says here, he says, כשמכניסים את הפרשיות בבתים, שלהם כורכים אותן במטלית, ועל המטלית שיער, ואחר כך מכניסים אותם בבתיהם, ושיער זאת צריך להיות שיער בהמה או חיה טהורה, אפילו מנבלות ותפירפות שלהם, just like by the clef. כבר נהגו כל העם לכורכן בשיער זנב העגלים. That you use hair from a calf. So according to the Rambam, you see, you first put the matlit, and then on the matlit, on the cloth, or the way we do it with cloth, you put the hair. However, the Beit Yosef brings opinions to do it the other way around. He brings from the Smag, after he quotes the Rambam, he says, "V'chatab Smag alav v'davar ze lehefech biYerushalmi demgila perek Kama alcha moshe Sinai." You כותבים דורות וכורכים בשיער ותולים במטלית. וכן הוא בשימוש הרבה. In other words, that it's the other way around. First you put the se'ar, and then you put the matlit. And the Rambam, he explains that according to the Rambam, it makes more sense to first put the matlit and then the se'ar, because it would be held better if you first put the matlit on and then you wrap around it the hair. Anyway, because of this, some say, brings afterwards opinion, says it doesn't matter if you put the matlit or first the se'ar. The Maaseh, what the Ramah says is to do both. In other words, to fulfill both opinions, that it needs to be first hair, then matlit, and the opinion that says first matlit, then hair, you do both. So we do hair, the cloth, and then the hair on top again to fulfill all opinions. And that's what he says here. ונהגו לקרוא שיער לפרשה, ואחר כך כורכים עליו קלף, וחוזרים וכורכים עליו שיער. Here the Mishnah brings that reason. We want to be able to say both opinions. It doesn't matter which one. Then he says, right? We saw that in the Rambam also, that the minhag is to take a hair from a calf. What's the reason? Here he brings it in the Mishnah Berurah. כדי שיזכור מעשה העגל ולא יחטא, וגם כדי לכפר על עוון זה. וכתב אליה רבא, דמזה הטעם טוב לעשות כל תיקון תפילין מאור העגל, ולהפוקים מאותם שעושים רצועות מאותיש. Okay, so like many things, this is coming to be מכפר על חטא העגל, וביום פוקדי ופקדתי. So that's why the minhag is to use hair from a calf. ואם לא מצא של עגל, כורך בשל פרה, or shel shor, in other words, because Mikar Adin could be from any kosher animal. ורוחץ השיער היטב בתחילה עד שיהיה נקי. Okay, make sure first you clean the hair, that it's clean before you put it. And then he says, קצת שיער זה צריך שיראה חוץ לבתים. That a little bit of this hair should come out so that it will be exposed outside of the batim. Okay, what's the source for that? So he brings that in the Beit Yosef, and this is one of the things that we do based on the Zohar. Okay, there's no halachic source for this. Rather, the source is the Zohar. He says, וכתוב בספר הזוהר פרשת בו, ששיער זה צריך שיראה חוץ לבתים. צריך בסוד העניין, וכתב זה מהר"ר, הרב רב מנחם מריקנתי, בסוף פרשת בו אל פרעה. So regarding the hair sticking out, where exactly do we leave it sticking out? So first of all, he brings here in סעיף קטן ריש י"א, עיין במגן אברהם, ועיין בחידושי רבי עקיבא איגר, שהסכים ששיער היוצא יהיה פחות מאורך שעורה. The Magen Avraham brings, I think it's the Zohar itself, which says that the hair coming out should be less than the length of a seorah, a grain of barley, which is obviously very little. And the reason is because if it comes out more, it will become, it's Mekabel Tumah. And the Magen Avraham says that's not true, it's not Mekabel Tumah. But anyway, Rabbi Akiva Eiger says we should follow the Zohar on that as well. So even though we have hair sticking out, we make sure it's just a little bit of hair. Now, where should it stick out outside the batim? So he says, יש אומרים שיצא לבית שמונח בו פרשת קדש, ויש אומרים שאצל והיה עם שמוע, וטוב שיצא מפרשת והיה עם שמוע, בצד הפונה לפרשת קדש. In other words, that you put it coming out from by the bite of והיה עם שמוע, but on the inner part of it towards the parasha of Kadesh. So therefore, this is also sort of another case where there would be a slight difference between Tfilin shel Rashi and Tfilin shel Rabbeinu Tam, because since you want to put the hair by the parasha of Vayim Shamoah, and they're located differently between Tefillin de Rashi and Tefillin de Rabbeinu Tam. So the hair comes out in a different location in Tefillin de Rashi and Tefillin de Rabbeinu Tam. Tefillin de Rashi, it would be, I think, before the fourth, the Vayam Shema is at the end. So it will be between the third and the fourth. And in Rabbeinu Tam, it's inner. It's I think it's the second and the third, if I'm not mistaken, in Tefillin de Rabbeinu Tam, where this hair will be coming out. Okay, all right. Let's see another seif. ייתן כל פרשה בבית שלה שתהיה זקופה מעומד בביתה. When you put the parshiyot into the batim, they need to be standing upright. It's very interesting. They bring here in the Sharei Tshuva and also in the Orach Chaim here, he says, עיין בשערי תשובה, מה שכתב בשם הנודע ביהודה, דאין לחוש לשיטת רבינו תם שפוסק דווקא בשכיבה. If you will remember, by a mezuzah, we learned that there is a machloket between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. Does the mezuzah need to be upright, or does it need to be like lying down? Okay, according to Rashi, it needs to be upright. According to Rabbeinu Tam, it needs to be lying down. And as a compromise, the minhag of the Ashkenazim is to make it diagonal, as opposed to Sfaradim that just follow Rashi and Rambam, most Rishonim, that it's upright. The minhag of the Ashkenazim is to put it diagonally. That opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, in Tosfot, when brings that opinion, Tosfot says that according to Rabbeinu Tam, that's also by the case of Tefillin, that you need to put the parashiyot lying down and not upright. Okay, so it's the same machloket that we have there by mezuzah, we have here. Here, though, the Mechaber rules, and even the minhag of the Ashkenazim is this way, just to put it upright, like Rashi says, not to put it diagonal or anything of the sort. However, the Mishnah Berurah says, "B'diavad im netanasha mushkevet ein lifsol tefillin b'shvil zeh." Even according to Rashi, even though you're supposed to put it upright, if you put it lying down or the other way, there's a proof for that from the Gemara that b'diavad it's kosher even if it wasn't put upright. The reason it's sometimes a nafkamina is sometimes if you make the parashiyot too big and you have a difficult time fitting in, you might want to fold them or put them in diagonally so that they would all fit into the bait. So just one more seif and then we'll finish up. יהיה גיליון עליון תחילה, שזהו שורה עליונה וגיליון תחתון לצד פה הבתים. In other words, again, it should be, when it's placed upright, the top line should be the top line of the parashiyah and the bottom line of the parashiyah. אגב, וראש הפרשה יהיה מונח לצד ימין הקורא. שאם בא לפותחן או לקוראן, יהיו מלפניו כהלכתן. In other words, again, we always look at the tefillin not from the perspective of the person wearing the tefillin, but from the person looking at the tefillin, like we saw earlier by the location of the shin with the 4 and the 3. So therefore also it should be so that the opening of the Rosh Parasha, where the beginning of the writing is to the right of somebody facing the tefillins, as if to speak, so to speak, that if you would now come to open and read it, it would open where the writing begins. Okay. Any questions or comments on all of this? Okay, all right, very good. Shkuf to everyone.
Thank you.
Good day.
Go to Rabbi Nat.